Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to another episode of Bridging the Human Divide. My name is Shara Seaver. I'm an organizational culture and leadership consultant, a changemaker coach, and a social architect. I'm the founder of Igniting the Spark and the Community Resiliency Project. I work with organizational and community leaders on creating transparent, aligned cultures focused on people development, social, and planetary wellness. Bridging the Human Divide is my newest series of weekly conversations with everyday change makers committed to moving from polarization to understanding of the divergent perspectives in our communities, workplaces, organizations, and personal relationships. The intent is to invite all to gather around the fire of collective heart intelligence so that we can all move forward with more grace, understanding, dialogue, and engaged compassion in action. And today I am delighted to have a longtime friend, community colleague, Elizabeth Moriarty, to join me. And we're going to take a deep dive today into what creates separation and how can we heal that illusion in the alchemy of the community cauldron. Elizabeth is quite a powerhouse. She's a wise and gracious healer, a teacher and modern medicine woman from Northern California who holds space with laser presence and a very generous heart. She's a masterful counselor, body worker, and facilitator. Elizabeth specializes in spiritual and emotional support in the areas of sexuality, trauma, personal growth, and change work. Elizabeth facilitates dynamic community ceremonies, grief healing circles, love, sex, and relationship circles. And along with her private healing practice, she's been a longtime performer and ritualist at many venues throughout California and the West Coast. So I would like to welcome you, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to diving into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shara. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's just jump in because we've got some rich ideas to exchange. And I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Elizabeth, I know I've reached out a couple times, just knowing your work over almost 2 decades now and participating in so many different community circles and rituals and ceremonies and just co-creations and collaborations for community solutions and personal healing. So what inspired you to be part of this today?
Well, I appreciate you tapping on me and acknowledging the wealth of wisdom and experience I have as a leader. And it took many years for me to, kind of craft and build and develop my maturity and my confidence and leadership skills. So I hate to admit it sometimes, but I've entered clearly my elder phase. So I'm feeling inspired for that give back. So giving and allowing all my wisdom and allowing everything that I've learned and accomplished to actually serve and support. And so I'm honored to share this conversation with you. And it's a crazy time. It's a crazy time. So we need these inspired dialogues, which is part of the reason why I've held gatherings and circles and, deep dive opportunities for people so we can be seen and heard in community. We can share valuable insights and understanding with each other that builds, not only community, but our own resilience.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned the elder piece and, welcome to the elder era, I will say. Yeah. And what I'm learning is that we're really being asked to
Mhm.
share our wisdom and to collaborate with these, these bright
Yeah.
younger generations and light workers, community change makers that are also part of this. But yeah, there is a huge divide. I mean, it's now identified in the mainstream.
Mhm.
I think it was brought out just recently in the documentary, The Social Dilemma. We're seeing divide in our communities. We're seeing it in our relationships. We're seeing it within ourselves.
Yeah.
So that was my purpose, of course, to bring people, everyday change makers like yourself, to see what are you doing to help bridge the divide, especially as you said, somebody now as an elder and
Mm.
stepping up as a leader in whatever communities you're part of. So
Mhm.
I guess my first question for you, just what have you noticed being potential causes or root causes of this increasing polarization that I have never seen
Mhm.
in my lifetime? And just wondering what your insights are around that.
Well, it's a lot of tension and stress in the field for a lot of people, and isolation. And one of the things I've noticed about holding space for events, for example, Sacred Supper, um, people really have a need to be seen and heard in community, and to find those sacred places where we are bearing witness to one another, we're authentic and transparent, and we can be real. And I think a lot of times we're just kind of in our own little world, and it's finding ourselves sometimes in a coherent, cohesive, sacred, grounded space where something in us really relaxes. And I think when we don't have that, we are just kind of these automated folks trying to get by, and maybe our relationships are limited to the people in our inner circles, or our family, or our friends, or so it's important that we sit with others and we are seen and heard, and we have a chance to drop into our humanity. And I think that I've seen palpable changes with people and in the unified field.
Yeah, we're going to go back. We're going to take a little deeper dive into that. So what I'm hearing you say, I heard some solutions already presented, which I definitely want to talk about. But the stress, just the everyday stress of just being on a planet with 7 billion people, having so much, I think, of what we, at least, let's just start with this country. Let's start with the Western world,
Mhm.
where I have really seen, we just take so much for granted living in privilege. If we look at it from a global perspective, we all live in
Mhm.
privilege.
Mm.
And I think what has been happening is that the rug has been pulled out from many,
Yeah.
so that so-called safety net of comfort zone is no longer there for a vast majority. I'm just going to say in this country, we can
Right.
let's just stay where we're at right now. And I have observed that that's a big reason for the divide. I've also mentioned, the media and the manipulation and disinformation. So because of that, there's what I'm assuming you were saying is that there's this emotional uh, deregulation that is occurring. And as a result, what is it that people need? And what I've heard you say is that we all have this common basic need of being seen, being heard, belonging, being included. And I've been part of your sacred suppers, many of them, and many versions of those kinds of containers. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about just what is a sacred supper, first of all, because not all of our listeners they have an experience, but just what is it? What purposes has it served? And what have
Mhm.
some of the results been for those that have participated with you?
Yeah, thank you. The Sacred Supper was an inspiration to host a community gathering, kind of like a dinner party with purpose. And we sit in circle. I provide the meal. I've been a caterer for a million years, so it gives me an opportunity to feed people. And we sit in circle and we share from the heart. So again, I've noticed what happens when we sit and we drop in together. Um, Sacred Supper has drawn strangers and friends from diverse communities, and that was also part of the point. Let's just cast a wide net and see who it is that comes, so we have a lot of different perspectives and a lot of people from different walks of life. So when we all sit together in circle, we share from the heart, it drops us into our humanity. And we see how very similar we are. We see that we have a lot of the similar struggles. You know, we've had people open up about issues with depression and being on medication and having all sorts of shame about it, but they were able to share that in community and be supported. And, you know, people with the common thing of like empty nesting with their kids going off to college, or their parents and elders aging, and some things we share. You know, we're all heading down this road, and some of our issues and concerns are quite similar. So it gives us a chance to be authentic, to be transparent. And I think there's a lot of people who sit quietly, who aren't the first to jump and share. And so I've made a point to create a very spacious and relaxed space so that people with those quieter voices can open up and share in a way that they perhaps haven't.
Yeah.
What
I'm hearing and what I've experienced too in the past, and also just being in a lot of other ceremonies and sacred circles, is how important it is to create that energetic field when we start to gather, so that everybody does feel safe. And I'm of the belief, Elizabeth, that this might be, just as an example, Sacred Supper just being one of your many offerings for individual and community healing and transformation. But what I'm perceiving too, that these kinds of containers that you offer, for some people, it may actually be one of the first times that they have sat with others and felt safe.
Right.
Yeah. And just that in itself can be incredibly healing. And again, depolarizing. Because if we come in with fear, for example, into any kind of interpersonal situation, we already have a shield up that's not going to allow the kind of connective and transparent communication that we might want. What else would you like to share just about the kind of work you've been doing that is, diffusing depolarization? If we have some examples, just
one of the
what you've been really passionate about, like you were mentioning resiliency as well, and the importance of that. So I'm just going to let you run with it for a while.
Thank you. Yeah. I have some notes that I took, and one of the things that I think is important that I find, in the circles, ceremonies, and for example, Sacred Supper, is that we need to really normalize emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. We have to normalize being vulnerable and transparent to admit when we're not okay, when we're having feelings, when we're struggling, because I think everybody tries to kind of put on a happy face and keep going. And so there's something that really happens that strengthens our empathy and our compassion when we can bear witness to someone being real and authentic. And I think we need to learn that. We need to learn how to be better listeners and bear witness in a way that's compassionate, that supports someone, just if we're there saying, I hear you. I hear it's hard. There's something so basic in that. And yet for someone to be heard and to be seen, in something that's hard, it starts to kind of break the shame and that kind of protective shield we have from being seen in either our struggles or our shadow or our suffering, especially around our shadow issues. If we have a tendency towards something like, I'll be the first to admit, having been in my life quite defensive, and I've done a lot of work around not being so defensive, where I can just really soften and let myself own my shit, and just go, wow, I'm triggered, I'm feeling defensive, and I noticed that reactivity pattern, and let me just pull that in and settle into my actual nature, which, is everything.
Exactly. You brought out some really rich material here, so I want to go back and just harvest a bit of this if we could. So one of the things I heard you say, and it's come up in a couple other of the interviews I've had, but you know, how important it is to have empathy and to listen. I mean, how important it is and how well one does it I have found, again, with myself, it's been an ongoing journey, but just in general, it's a skill development. We don't just become good listeners, or we aren't just good listeners, or we don't just become all of a sudden people who are sharing empathy. So I know you've done a lot of training and counseling as well. And so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions. Again, this the series is more about, I want people to have like tools in their, you know, magic backpack that we can access immediately in these times of the great turning. So just how can we become beings of empathy, beings of deep listening? Just suggestions.
Thank you. That's a great inquiry. I think, you know, the 4 agreements teach us a lot. And one that I think is important is to not take things personally. Mm-hmm. I had a little thing with a friend recently, and I know that they've been really wounded by a relationship. And I think that they've got a lot going on. And that whole interaction was really difficult. And, but what we couldn't do is just stop and be together and allow everything to just, you know, for me not to take things personal, for him to not take it personal, to soften, relax, and to be able to just kind of clear the slate with the reactivity, the defensiveness, the projection, blame, shame. We have to start really getting hold of those reactivity patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because, you know, once you're down the road, there it is. Shame, blame, make wrong, the reactivity takes over. So I've developed a thing, partly because that recent issue was hard, a thing called, I'm calling it stop and drop.
Okay, let's hear about that. That sounds great.
Stop and drop it. Drop the trip. And right. So we can at least first stop, take a breath. It allows us to be self-aware. It allows us to put our attention on our own thing, our own being, our own reactivity, like, wow, my heart is beating. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling this. I just want to stop. I want to drop the trip. So if we stop, we become self-aware, then we can hopefully get a hold of those reactivity, defense, you know, blame, projection, all those kind of bad habits.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're ingrained patterns that, you know, where none of us are immune to the patterns that led us, from early childhood, we know this, but that led us away from the perfection and divinity of our being. So what I'm hearing you suggest is just, it's emotional regulation. It's also emotional intelligence. These are basic skills that are, thank goodness, now being also taught in schools to our children. But I love the stop and drop. I mean, anybody can do that. Just take that pause, find out what's going on in your body, you know, assess, you know, what's true and what's not true. Or as you said, don't take these things personally. Yeah. I know you've done a lot of somatic work too. I've been in, you know, a number of dance journeys, if you will, with you over the years. And is there a somatic tip that goes with the drop piece?
Well, again, I think it's really more about self-awareness and breath and presence. So if, you know me, I'm a mover, and it doesn't always work for people that I'm embodied and powerful. And I might need to say, gosh, I need to move energy. And I'd be like, huh, 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 you know, and do some kind of somatic thing to let my creature body move energy. That's not always well accepted or landed, right? People are like, oh,
not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. But there's something about really being in our creature body and knowing that our creature body has its response patterns, and that we have to bring that self-awareness of, like, my heart beating, my belly is contracted, I'm scared, we've got to be aware of those chemicals, freeze, flight, fight.
All of it, right.
all of it. So having that kind of self-awareness to attune to, wow, my creature body is activated right now. And
Right.
that if we can stop, we can drop the trip, just allow ourselves to breathe and become more regulated. I
Yeah.
think that's really a basic around emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. And I think,
Absolutely. I love that you've mentioned it that way. Just like, let's take hold of the reptilian brain. And
yeah.
so the stop and drop. So you referred to the 4 agreements. Did you want to expand on the other 4?
Well, I think they're all really valuable,
I think it's worth mentioning. Just it's Jose Arguelles' work, right? And
Don Miguel Ruiz.
sorry, Don Miguel. Sorry, that's the Mayan calendar. Yeah, Don Miguel Ruiz. But just what are the 4 agreements? I've used them a lot with organizations, just for really, really basic, leadership training, leadership development. Just starting with something as simple as the 4 agreements, to avoid assumptions, to avoid conflict. So, but do you mind just doing a quick run through?
Yeah. Don't make assumptions.
Right. Don't take things personally. Make no assumptions. Right.
Honor the word. And
honor the word. And what's the last one?
Do your best.
Do your best. Yeah. That's fabulous. So if we could live like that, just that formula, I think, Elizabeth, would easily depolarize.
It really would.
So many situations and conversations, in our communities, in our city governments, in some of the decision making, with the neighbors, even interpersonal relationships. So I love being reminded about that. Go ahead.
They seem very simplistic.
Right.
But in actuality, they are very complex because they are threaded throughout our culture and our society. For example, my mother, in her generation, she comes from this, I wouldn't say she's not a liar. She's not somebody who makes things up. But for example, if you're running late, she might say, give an excuse. Oh, just tell them that that your mother called you and you're late. Like, don't say the real reason, make up some socially acceptable reason, right? And that's not really honoring the word. That's not really being totally honest. It's it's like a sugar coating. Oh, I'm late because da 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 da, rather than, wow, I'm late because I messed up on the time. Or
exactly. I made a mistake.
And I can admit that I'm late. I'm sorry. And I think apologizing, the other one that I think is powerful is Ho'oponopono. Being willing to apologize and being willing to admit when we're either wrong or we're off or we've made some assumptions or we've taken something personal. We've allowed our reactivity to go down the road to where we're creating secondary problems because we're, lashing out. So I think there's a lot of tools out there for us.
Yeah, so I want to do even a little bit more of a dive, and I have an example too. And I'm not talking about a global polarization right now, or what we're experiencing from social media and all the manipulation and disinformation that's coming just from the way social media is designed with the artificial intelligence, but just simple divides that can lead to really big polarization. And I just want to share this example because I think this is what you're talking about, especially when it's like make no assumptions. So I had a dishwasher leak the other day and flooded my rug. And so I mopped everything, put the rug outside. Well, our HOA doesn't allow things to be hung over the railing. But rather than my neighbor coming to me, who I've had a really great relationship with, and saying, hey, she reported it. And it's like, that's the assumption piece. It's just like, all you have to do is have a conversation with somebody. And I see this happen so much in, tight-knit groups and communities where we avoid, for whatever reasons, we're avoiding having important yet simple conversations. Even a question of curiosity or inquiry. I'm wondering why. Or do you have a moment to talk about this? And I have found that so many conflicts could be solved with that simple vulnerable, as you said, how important it is for us to have the vulnerability, but this vulnerable approach where, hey, I'm just curious, like what happened? Why did you do this?
Yeah.
And this is the impact it's having on me. So
Yeah.
do you have anything to say about that? I know you've had a lot of experiences with probably facilitating those kinds of experiences or even being directly involved with them.
Yeah, what's coming up for me, Shara, is I think that there's a lot of inherent addictions. People are really addicted to being right and to power. So there is this, tendency to want to claim the power. So why, and there's also an aversion to discomfort. And I think the aversion to discomfort says a lot about our lack of emotional intelligence and maturity, our emotional literacy, because sometimes you just have to be uncomfortable. The truth is uncomfortable. It might have been too uncomfortable for your neighbor to come to you directly. She might be conflict avoidant. It just might be uncomfortable for her to say something like that. Maybe her dad was a rageaholic, or we don't know what.
I don't know exactly. So I can't make an assumption either. So
right. So there's this aversion to discomfort, and I think we have to get accustomed and more functional inside of discomfort, emotional discomfort, interpersonal discomfort. And it might be, again, bringing through inquiry. I've come to be a real fan of inquiry and asking questions and allowing that to be a tool to not just heal division or relate with people who have different thoughts. I mean, I'm living in the Bible Belt. I live with people who are devout, religious, Christian, Catholic, and it's also the South. So it's really different. There are a lot of red folks around here and Trump supporters, and there's a lot of difference of opinion. And I just want to be curious and interested how we can have a positive interaction that doesn't have to debase. It doesn't have to go to politics. It doesn't have to go with what divides us, but we can actually come together with our humanity and have an inquiry around what makes us tick and who we are, even though we're so different. And I've got good, close friends in the class that I teach here. These are very close and dear people, and we couldn't be more opposite. Some people are fundamentalists, and we are dear with each other. So we found common ground through an exercise class, but I love that. It gives me hope, Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I'm having similar experiences being in an area very different than where you and I both came from. And again, that's what kind of inspired these conversations, but also just to find the commonalities. What I have found is, we care about our community. We care about actually the welfare of each other. That has been very touching for me, even though very different values, very different perspectives, very different backgrounds. We care about the land here as well, where we're at. So, finding again that common ground has been a great way to depolarize and just don't get into the. I've had to avoid conversations that I'd like to get into for the very reason that you just mentioned. It's like, would I rather be right or would I rather be connected?
Connected. That's a great one.
Yeah, I'd rather be connected. And you mentioned something else about inquiry. I've been doing this work called appreciative inquiry, and I use it with organizations as well, where we ask a series of questions that, again, really start to uncover what is really going on. In organizations, it's more about the team or the project or just whatever they're trying to accomplish. So, again, I just kind of want to give you, just let you go forward. But in these times, and we know they're difficult. We've got COVID going on. We've got different opinions about what COVID's about. We've got probably one of the most important elections in the history of this country occurring. Yes. And we're noticing more and more divide or polarization, even within our own communities, with like people that I don't know, I've been connected with for decades that have gone, for me, a completely different direction that's hard for me to understand. And and I still value who the person is, very much so.
Mhm.
So again, with all of your experience that you've been doing, individual healing and community work and ritual work, more tips or suggestions that, again, that we can just put in our magic backpack
Mhm.
and take out there to be, vehicles of depolarization.
Yeah, I think it's important that we find our humans that we share affinity and attunement with, that we have a common language. And there
Mhm.
should be, I think, for each of us to have, I mean, I started over completely, right, in a whole new part of the world, but I have some very close and dear connections. It's like less is more because we're very highly attuned and connected. And I have some people that I can be really raw and real, truthful and honest, and we have that reflective mechanism. And one of my closest friends started out as a client, and she credits me with saving her life. She was in terrible shape, and she came and we did some counseling sessions, we did some somatic work which she hadn't done before. She'd done mostly talk therapy. It wasn't really working for her, so there was something about the alchemy of she and I, and the work that I provided her for her healing, that really helped her catapult out of a really dark time. She's now one of my closest friends.
Mm.
She also is there for me, so that
Mhm.
I can open up and say, gosh, I just need to unpack this thing. And it's inspiring for her because it brings out her wisdom
That's
and
beautiful.
our sisterhood. So again, human relationships that have attunement and affinity, where we speak a common language, where we can be seen and heard, where we can get support for being real and raw and authentic. And especially when it's messy, sometimes it's just messy.
Yeah.
And, the other thing I think is an important too, to have advisors and counselors. And, Evelina Rose, she's a good friend. And after I had difficulty with the friend, I asked her, we were hanging out, and I said, can I reflect about some things? And I noticed for myself, when I'm with someone who's a space holder that's wise and present, I can run my own process, my own transformative process is so free. If someone's kind of blaming me and making me wrong, I'm kind of on the defensive and I'm kind of protective, and then I get reactive or I take it personal, and there's all that. But when the space is just, there's empathy and compassion and acceptance, this person loves me, I can talk about my shadow so thoroughly. I can own my stuff, and I can own my stuff in a way that gets me to understand, oh gosh, that was my da 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 da, and oh yeah, they said this, and boy, that tripped me up, and I went right down the hill on my slip zone with my defensiveness, or collapsed into shame. Or so I'm appreciative of the people in my life where I can unpack my own material.
So I'm hearing, yeah, that's a really good survival skill, and a good resiliency tool is that even, yes, we have the common community and we're sharing the resources in the community, but do have, as you said, less is best. I'm agreeing with you on that so much, that a few high quality, supportive, loving relationships of affinity are important for our survival.
Mhm.
And yeah, and it's difficult when we find ourselves in a new area to make that happen. And then I also heard you say to have good counselors or advisors or coaches. I mean, we can't do this alone. So, getting into groups that have these skilled facilitators and safe containers, I agree with you so much how important that is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do kind of feel like they have to do it themselves,
Right.
and I witnessed that. A friend just went through a terrible breakup. He didn't really get any help. I spent hours on the phone with him, offering him counseling as a friend, but he didn't really do therapy or rebirthing or even get body work. And I just watched the poor guy kind of inside stewing in his own juices.
It's so hard. Yeah.
Why is he not reaching out? Why will he not accept support? Or what is it that's inside that says I have to kind of muscle through it and be self you know, in a self-contained circle there, it really didn't serve. And I think he's carrying still a lot of wounding and trauma from not getting the support to move through it and metabolize it. And I think that's a really important word, metabolizing our hurts, our traumas, and our wounding. You know, we need to metabolize. That means it's a process. And sometimes we have to talk about it. We have to rant and rave. Sometimes we need to pound the pillows. Sometimes we need to just collapse on the floor crying. Sometimes we need to talk it out with someone where we can get insights and understanding, so we can understand and wrap our head around some things. And so I think it's a terrible chronic issue, actually. Number one, people are really into electronics and relating from behind their keyboards. And two, people are not really admitting when they could use support and help to metabolize hurts or wounds or traumas or some of our just life. I mean, just life is hard enough at times.
And again, that comes back to the, you know, the vulnerability piece and the challenges that we're all having. But that is such an important piece, not only to ask for help and reach out, but do not use social media as your tool for support, because right now we have learned that it's, you know, the AI functions are actually working against us on dangerous levels.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else, Elizabeth? Again, the theme being, you know, depolarization and, you know, community as a transformative tool. Anything else that you could suggest? It's obviously you know, the time of the lone wolf is over, right? So it's other things that you'd like to share that you've directly experienced or have facilitated for others.
Can I look at my notes?
Sure, go for it.
One of the things that, you know, patriarch is such a loaded topic. And I don't really stand behind that or wrap around it. But one of the things that's been alive for me in this last little while is how much attention has been placed on racism. And when I did my counseling training, my teacher was very smart, very sharp, and systematic racism, I think, was his dissertation topic or something. He was really passionate about that. And he said, if you're not actively working to unwind and dismantle racism, you're complicit with it, because it's so systematic in our culture. And everyone recently, because of Black Lives Matters, has become very aware of racism and white privilege and entitlement. And I love that inquiry has just popped open with a lot of people. But I think patriarchy is as systematic, invisibly woven in our culture and our society, to such that our action, words, and deeds are really rooted in a system of kind of top-down, big dog, dominant male culture. So we don't realize that it's so alive. And I think that if people, especially men, even men in the spiritual communities, think that it's not about them, they think it's all about the Republicans in the White House or the this and the that and the older generations, but it's systematic. And until we start to take note of our own actions, words, and deeds that reflect this invisibility of these systematic patterns, racism, patriarchy, misogyny, you know, it's not going to shift.
Right. You know, that would be a topic for another series, actually. But I like that you brought it up, that it's like, it's come to the surface, you know, and yes, systematic. I have actually seen it. It's ancestral.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what creates the system. It's something that has been going on for multiple generations. And, you know, this now in this time, in this age of Aquarius, in this unveiling, in this revealing of the shadow, as you referred to, this is now when all of these topics that we never talked about are coming up. There's still a huge amount of a denial of whether they exist or not. There's still many, many people who deny climate change and refer to it as weather engineering. I mean, there's still but the conversations are beginning to happen. And again, what we want to do in these conversations is just what has been presented here today, is take some of these tools and go into these very difficult conversations with curiosity, with vulnerability, with your emotional intelligence and regulation, with inquiry, with understanding that, as you said, Elizabeth, we all need to be seen and heard and included in belonging. Conflict is one of the greatest gifts of creativity, in my experience. And if we allow ourselves to enter that chaotic, uncomfortable space, we learned this in dance.
And I think self-awareness is the key. If there's anything that I would say that it really kind of bubbles down to, again, whether it's racism or patriarchy or any of the systematic, cycles in our culture, we need to be self-aware around everything. And if we're not self-aware, then in some ways we're complicit. We think that we can vote them out, but it may be that our very behavior is continuing these systematic patterns. So self-awareness, personal responsibility, being accountable, and being curious.
Yeah,
exactly. Where's that coming from in me? Maybe it's some attitude they kind of took on from their father or their grandfather. So again, it's ancestral. These are being handed down, and it's normalized in our world. But we need to start questioning some of those normalized patterns and systems in our world, because I think those are the changes where it's really going to make a difference in community, especially around polarization and the division, is to soften and be self-aware around our own contribution or our own shadow.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like you said, with the 4 agreements, just what's the best I can be today? So these are really big topics that we've just brought up towards the very end here. And just that, I love the point again that you said, this normalization, and how we're starting to excavate this normalization. And it's like, why is this normal? And how is this serving? And how can this be explored more? Again, in the organizations that I've worked with, in teams I've worked with, we don't encourage conflict. We're not saying, let's have a conflict today, but we have, we start our meetings with withholds. Is there anything is going on for you today, or anything that's going on with you and another today, that would get in the way of you being the most contributive member of the process that we're engaged in? And I love being part of that kind of culture. And I think you do that as well in some of your facilitation community kind of work, where again, or the sacred suppers, where you're let's bring it to the surface, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is it. If people want to get a hold of you to engage in some of your work, either live, although with COVID, I know it's a little difficult, but with online kind of coaching and counseling, and it's elizabethmoriarty.com. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right, fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, I just want to appreciate you. Thank you so much for your dynamic presence and for holding space for this conversation, or the many conversations. It's really important, and I really appreciate your.
It is very important. And next week's guest is a surprise. I haven't announced it yet, but I want to invite everyone to join us here again next Wednesday, September 23rd, 11 a.m. Pacific time, live on Facebook. And in the meantime, everyone, just think of one thing today that you can do to bridge the divide, to create some kind of depolarization in your world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Blessings. Bye-bye.